All right, I am joined today by the rock star of consulting, Mr. Alan Weiss. He has not only led consulting firms, but now trains consultants, written multiple, 60 if I believe correctly, around 60 books that have been bestsellers. An incredible mind in the world of consulting. And, sir, I'm so excited to have you on today.
You keep speaking, Henry. I could listen to you all day. It's good.
So we're going to start with our six lightning round questions. They're the same for everybody. And the first one is, where's your hometown and what is it known for?
This is East Greenwich, Rhode Island, where I now live. I'm originally just outside New York City, but we've lived here for 35 years. And this town is the prototypical affluent suburban community where you can get to an airport or a train station fairly quickly, but you're not in the middle of the city. And so on this property here, we have heron and geese and deer and all kinds of wonderful wildlife, even though we can get to the city in 10 minutes or so.
Wow, that's cool. You're a little slice of country very close to the city.
Yeah, it's very nice. My wife found it when we came up here 35 years ago, and it was overgrown. I mean, it wasn't even occupied. And I said, well, that was nice, but what do you want to do? And she said, we're buying that property. I mean, she had this vision, and so that was that.
That's neat. Well, this next question is kind of an unfair question, and anybody who's read any of your work or has any knowledge of you whatsoever is going to guess your answer to this one right away. And it's, do you prefer cats or dogs?
Well, I prefer dogs. When we were first married, we had a couple of cats because we lived in a small apartment, so we could afford. But we've had about 8 dogs now, and just before we began, as you know, I had to kick Royce, my German Shepherd, out of here because he was making a fuss.
What kind of music do you listen to?
I'm eclectic, so I think Sinatra. People are going to hate this, but I think Sinatra was the greatest popular singer ever. I saw him live 5 times. I just recently, in the last month, saw Billy Joel in his 100th sellout at Madison Square Garden. I think Billy Joel is great. I love doo-wop rock and roll from the 50s into the 60s. Right now, I like Lady Gaga very much. I think she's a great musician, and I have to tell you, I don't get Taylor Swift, but my daughter is in Paris right now with my grandchildren. They just watched her concert in Paris. It turns out it was cheaper to fly to Paris and watch her than to buy tickets in the United States to do it. Interesting.
Wow.
I also like classical music. I'm not so big on opera, but I love the classical music. I love Baroque music, and some opera. I mean, I could cry when I hear somebody sing Nessun Dorma.
So does your love for Frank Sinatra have to do with both of you being the two best things to ever come out of Hoboken?
Actually, I lived up on the hill, Union City. We looked down on Hoboken, but today Hoboken's gentrified. Union City still is not. But yeah, of course, my mother-in-law, who lived in Hoboken, we grew up there, of course knew Sinatra's family, because everybody in Hoboken claims they knew Sinatra's family. But, I mean, people will be singing and listening to his songs 100 years from now. They won't be doing that with rap. They won't be doing that with Taylor Swift. I've probably driven away half your viewers now. But Sinatra's that kind of classic. I mean, if you look on the female side, it's Billie Holiday. The tragic life, but the same kind of... They didn't just sing, they told stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of storytelling, what are you currently reading?
I've got about 7 books lined up. I just started Toxic Prey by John Sanford. I read all of his work. I'm reading a biography of Joseph Epstein, who's he's in his early 80s. He's one of the great essayists and intellectuals extant today, I believe. I just finished City in Ruins, which is the last book in a trilogy based here in Providence. And it's a fictional account of the Irish and Italian mafia back when and what happens to the families. Interesting book. I've got Baldacci's new book lined up to read. And so that's what I can recall on the reading list right now. But I generally have 6 or 7 books. I generally read 2 or 3 at a time. I go back and forth because it's maybe 2 fiction, 1 nonfiction.
I was going to say, as a primarily nonfiction writer, you have quite the list of fiction on your reading list.
I learn more from fiction than nonfiction. I don't read many business books at all. I think most self-help books are bogus, even though I write books to help people because they assume the reader is damaged. And, I've written so. When people ask me how I've written so many books, I tell them I go for volume and not accuracy. And about 20% of those people say, "That's interesting. How do you do that?" So.
Well, changing gears just slightly, who is the biggest inspiration in your life?
Well, I've had several. I mean, my wife primarily. I mean, we've been married for 58 years in this coming August, and she's really been a guide and a navigator and a sounding board and everything else. So she's been a huge influence. I think outside of my immediate family, listening to my kids and now my grandchildren, I got a job in Princeton at a firm called Kepner Trigo, and Ben Trigo was as close to a genius as I've ever stood. And I sort of learned consulting on his dime as I went around the world. I was running North America and South America and Asia, and I spent 11 years there learning. But I would have to say, it would be terrible for me not to include the fact that my teachers in grammar school, in inner city grammar school, Union City, New Jersey, I can still name every one of them, had a profound influence on me, far more than high school, even though I was an exchange student in high school, far more than undergraduate school or any of my graduate degrees. That is how, and I went to Rutgers, which was a fine, fine school, and I learned a lot there. But man, they taught me how to use English. They taught me the 8 parts of speech, how to diagram a sentence, how to do math in my head. They taught me history. They taught me geography. And consequently, I just kept that momentum up. And those 8 wonderful, saintly people really got me started in the right direction with the right momentum.
That's incredible. And it leads right into the next question, and is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
I believe in therapy. And my first therapist, and this has to go back, 30-something years. He said to me once, he threw down his pen. He said, "For God's sakes, Alan, it's about success, not perfection." And that changed my life. It freed me up. And I tell people that all the time today. And when I realized that perfection really kills excellence, perfection leads to procrastination. It's really an evil. It's almost an emotional illness. It's perfectionism. Yes. And so he changed my life with that. And that piece of advice was extraordinarily valuable.
Well, to steal a line from your books and your writing on being the contrarian, you hit on one of the things that I like to highlight a lot is everyone in the business world or in the success world likes to talk about finding your why. And I say forget about your why and just start doing something, and your passion and your purpose will find you as you're in the process of doing stuff. Because there's so many people that get stuck trying to figure out exactly the right answer to what's my passion, what's my purpose, what's the exact why that I have here, and they never leave that step. They don't actually start doing anything. And it's that action that predicates success. It's not going to happen if you don't take any action.
Well, that's right. There's an old trope in the speaker's profession about a stonemason, and everybody tells the story. But they say you come across a stonemason, and you say, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm laying bricks." Then you go to a second one, you say, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a cathedral." And this is supposed to show that the second person has a career, not just a job, and he'll do a better quality job. But I have added to this. I think there's a third stonemason. And when you ask him what he's doing, he says, "I'm bringing people closer to God." Now, that's a calling. And I believe that eventually you find your calling, which I think is what you're saying. Yes. And when you find your calling, you have one of the 3 key components for success, and that is a passion. Your calling evokes a passion. And so you don't worry about hours, you don't worry about how much money you make. You just want to contribute and help people. And I think that's very important for all of us.
Absolutely. So, talking about a calling, where does your story start? Where does the story of Alan Weiss as the rock star of consulting start?
Well, I'm not quite sure where to start. I was born in a very poor family. My parents would argue, I was 5 or 6 listening to this over how to pay a $40 rent bill for the apartment we lived in. And but I went to this wonderful grammar school. I went to an inner city high school where people stood in front of your locker and said, I'm not letting you into your own locker unless you give me a quarter. And you didn't file a grievance. You didn't protest in the halls. You didn't go to the principal. You found a way either to get into your locker or give the guy a quarter. Then I was an exchange student, one of the first, maybe the first to this day ever from that high school. And I spent 6 weeks going through Europe with a kid from Finland who had come over. And we wound up in Finland, but we went through, 20 countries. And that changed my life. It was my first airplane trip coming back. We sailed over on the Queen Mary, almost in steerage. And so I came back, and after college, I worked at Prudential. After 4 years, I left, and I went to this firm in Princeton. And Princeton taught me consulting. It taught me training. And then I left, and I was made president of a consulting firm, behavioral consulting firm here in Rhode Island. And this is what really was another turning point in my life. I was president for 15 months, and then the guy who owned the place fired me. We hated each other, This was W. Clement Stone, the late W. Clement Stone, who, was worth $400 million, and he believed in positive mental attitude, PMA. And there you go, success for positive mental attitude, right. And by the way, he's the guy who bailed out Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill was broke and a drunk. He was a con man. And Clement Stone bailed him out. Saved his life, probably. Anyway, W. Clement Stone says, I'm where I am because of positive mental attitude. I said, no, you have a positive mental attitude because you have $450 million, which you made in the insurance business. And if you give everyone $450 million, they'll all have a positive mental attitude. Well, he didn't like that, so I got fired. And so, it's 1985. I'm fired. We don't have that much money in the bank. He gave me 3 months severance. And I said to my wife, said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going out on my own. No idiot's ever going to fire me again. I'm going out on my own. At the time, 250,000 independent consultants in the United States. She says, all right. She says, forget the mortgage. Only she said it in a New Jersey way. She said, but you better get serious, just like that, with her finger. I said, you got it. And I got serious, and here I am.
Wow, that's incredible. So you take your contrarian stance to heart, even with your boss at the time with W. Clement Stone.
It's easy to go along with the crowd, but you'll never stand out in the crowd that way. And the fact is, I don't give people a hard time to give them a hard time, but I do call their bluff. I do tell them when the facts don't support their beliefs. There's my dog. Can you hear him? So when the facts don't support the beliefs, I have to point this out to people. And I think that you can be a contrarian as long as you can prove that what you're doing is really trying to help people. And during the quality frenzy, in the 80s and into the 90s, I pointed out that quality pertains to certain things, but not everything. And you can't go for zero intolerance. You have to tolerate. Nothing we do is perfect. A dinner isn't perfect. Right. A trip isn't perfect. A movie isn't perfect. And we have to be able to tolerate that. And I saw too many companies overemphasizing quality at the sake of a successful customer experience.
Ooh, that's it. That's a key thing that you said there, at the sake of a customer experience.
Yeah.
I cut my teeth in the healthcare industry, and it's very much focused on quality and the high reliability organization. But I've long said that high reliability organizations have it all wrong. The focus there is on failure and preventing failure and investigating failure. And my challenge to that is, what if you focused on success? What if you investigated every successful thing that happened and you knew why it worked before it broke? It's like driving a car. When you look at the potholes, guess what? You hit the potholes.
Well, you're absolutely right. If you say to someone in an exercise, you're going to build a new building, you're concerned about fire, what are you going to do? And 9 of the first 10 answers will be sprinkler systems, fire extinguishers, an escape route, insurance. Those are all contingent actions. They assume the fire has happened. Not enough people say, we're going to start by having a fire inspector inspect the property. We're going to separate combustible materials. There'll be no smoking signs. When you prevent a problem, you're saving time and money and embarrassment. And no matter how well you deal with a problem, once the sprinklers go off, the place is ruined.
Right. Absolutely. So you're starting out. You have recently gotten fired. You've got a couple months severance. What are your first steps?
Called everyone I knew. There was no internet. Picked up the phone, called everyone I knew, and I told them, here's what I was doing. And one person I called had a connection at Merck, pharmaceutical giant, and she said, they want something that we can't provide. They want a consulting and coaching. We're a training company. She said, I can set you up with the key guy there. And the key guy was a human resource person who was one of only 3 really enlightened human resources people I've ever met. And he passed away a couple of years ago. We've kept in touch all these years. But he saw his job as setting me up with line managers, with real buyers, so that he was fulfilling a job for them, but he was letting me deal directly with them instead of serving as a middleman. And I worked with Merck for 12 years. And I worked with Hewlett-Packard for 10 and Calgon for 5 and so on and so forth. And so I established these very long-term relationships because I got references and referrals like crazy, and I did great work. My feeling was, unless it was something that I couldn't handle, which is finance and technology, which to this day I don't handle, anything else I could either do or I learned how to do very quickly. And people love me. And I tell people today, I coach people all over the world. There are only 6 ways to really market. Social media is not one of them. There are 6 ways to market effectively, and the only mandatory one is referrals. And if you're not seeking referrals, you're never really going to achieve what you could.
Absolutely. The referral business is huge because it's that warm handoff from a trusted source. And that opens so many doors that people don't realize.
Yeah, if you look at the literature. Yeah, I had Jonah Berger from Wharton School as a guest at one of my conferences. And his research over the past, I don't know how many years, has been that executives, senior management, 87% of the time, or whatever the figure was, make decisions based on peer-level referral. Not from the internet, not from advertising, not even from recommendations from below. They call somebody they know and trust. So whether it's a vacation spot or a dentist or a coach or a consultant, that's how they do it. And if you think about it, you and I and your viewers here every day go to people we trust and say, where's a good spot in the Caribbean to vacation? What's a good piece of luggage to buy? What's your favorite airline? And that's how it works. And that's what we have to get very adept at doing.
So I say the number one way to get referrals is to be referable. And I take that from my buddy Jeffrey Gitomer. To be referable. So what did you do in your practice to be referable?
Well, I call it enabling the buyer to buy. And I've known Jeff for, 25 years. But I call it enabling the buyer to buy. And that means that nobody expects immediate access to you, but what you have to give them is fast responsiveness. And so I would return phone calls, I would return mail, I would then return email, whatever it was. I got back to people rapidly. I get a kick out of people who say, look, I'm on a client project, so I'm not using email, I'm not taking phone calls for 2 weeks. You're out of your mind, how limited are you? And so people wanted me, they got me, and I got back to them. And to this day, I practice this, and I tell people to use this. Time, date, action. When you're talking to someone who's a prospect, you never end a conversation or an email thread or anything without a time, date, and action to go forward. Whether it's a proposal, whether it's another meeting, no matter what it is. And I was very, very focused on that, and I still am. So, I get an email that's, looks like it could be an assignment. I'm back to them with some value, and then we'll take it from there. So I think that's the key.
Well, the key word that I heard there in that last bit is value. And you're delivering value immediately from that very first email response back to them. Not, wait, let me get some money from you and then I'll give you some value.
Yeah, that's right. No, you have to whet their appetite. So they say, if I'm getting this much in a casual conversation, what do I get if I hired this guy? And so you have to give value. Early on, when I was struggling there, after I was fired, I had a $5 booklet I was selling or something. I was doing anything to get attention. And a woman at Marine Midland Bank, which is now part of HSBC, bought it and gave it to her boss, who was a vice president. And he said, this is interesting, get the guy over here. So I go over to New York, and I said, wow, this is going to be great. Well, 45 minutes later, and he told me he had a meeting in 45 minutes. 45 minutes later, he said, there was nothing. I had nothing. I couldn't think of what to do for him. And he says, Alan, I got to go now. I said, I know, Keith. He said, well, I'll tell you what, call me Monday, we'll set something up, and so you can work for us. I said, what would that be? He said, I don't know, but we need smart people around here. I do know that. And so, just having a conversation where I provided value, where I was a peer of the buyer and not a supplicant, not somebody searching for work, this guy was so strong, he wanted people like that around him, and I find that still today. And I'll tell you something else. If you provide value, people will trust you. And you need trust if you're going to establish a business relationship, because if you don't have trust, they won't share objectives with you, they won't share issues that they're having, and so trust is vital. And to do that, you have to be vulnerable. You have to provide trust, and you have to be very candid.
Wow, that's a lot of value packed here in just the first few minutes. We talked about you went out on your own, called everyone you knew, provide value up front, build trust. There's got to be a fifth one here. Alan's 5 keys to starting out on your own.
Well, I created a proposal. And one of my books is, had a $1 million launch, I think it's called, How You Can Create Money in 90 Days. There you go. Yeah,
there we go.
One of the keys is to create a proposal, which I created the format for, which is just 2.5 pages. No boilerplate, no legal nonsense. It's 2.5 pages, and basically it says, here's what you want to achieve, here's how we'll measure success, and here's what it's worth to you. And by monetizing what it was worth, at least half the time or better, I was able to choose fees which showed a 10-to-1 return. So if it's $1 million, that justifies a $100,000 fee. And most of the consulting firms I talked to told me that if they got a 2.5 to 3-to-1 return for a client, the client was happy. So I said, well, forget that. I'm going to get a 10-to-1 return. And I'm going to get the value from the buyer. And when I started with this format, I just had objectives and measures. I didn't have value. And I said to myself, how come I can't raise my fees more than this? And I realized there was no ROI. That's when I started to include value. And see, when people say the buyer had sticker shock, that's because the buyer's looking at cost, but not at ROI. So if you include value, now you have ROI. And I said to one person, where else are you going to get a return like this? I mean, unless you bought Apple stock at 5, or invested in the Play the Fantastics, which ran for 40 years, you're not getting this return except with me.
Right.
And he bought it.
Absolutely. Well, as you saw here, I actually just pulled this back out and getting ready for this podcast and reread $1 Million Launch. So anybody starting out on your own, whether in consulting or any other career field, highly, highly recommend $1 Million Launch. Getting started in 90 days. Alan walks you through what to do in the first 30, the first 60, and the first 90, step by step on how to start your own business, particularly for the consulting world, but I think it's applicable across many service industries. Just a lot, jam-packed full of advice. And I have several of your others here, the $1 Million Consulting Proposals, of course, the Bible, $1 Million Consulting. This is the Bible of consulting. As you've written all these books, which was your favorite one to write?
Well, I would name 2. $1 Million Consulting, of course, because that was my 4th book, really, and it started as Confessions of a Consultant, and it was rejected 15 times. Wow. And I was driving back from a speaking engagement in Connecticut, and I had one of the very first car phones in my car. It was wired to the dash, a headset, but I was, my ego was such, I said, God, I want a phone in my car. And I get a call, and it's from my agent who's at McGraw-Hill, and McGraw-Hill, of course, was the creme de la creme. I said, Jeff, they like my book. He said, no, they hate your book, but they want to know how you could make $1 million as a solo consultant in a year. And, this is 1991. And I said, I can do that, in 6 minutes. He said, I got to tell him 6 months. Hold on. So I write the book, and I'm in the development editor's office in New York, and it's still called Confessions of a Consultant. She said, we have to change the name. I said, okay, I'll work on it. I got up. She said, sit down. She said, this is an absolutely true story. She said, we're going into production tomorrow. I need a title now. I said, Julie, it's about how to make $1 million consulting. And she said, that's the title, just like that. And it became a franchise. So, that the phrase is trademarked, and, I've done workshops and all kinds of things with it. The other book, though, I'll mention, I wrote about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's called $1 Million Maverick. And that's sort of a semi-autobiography, and I'm talking about how you can stand out in a crowd, and sort of look good while you're standing there, really.
Wow. That's a neat story from your progression from getting fired to now being the rock star of consulting, $1 million consultant, how to make $1 million in a year. What was your drive and your resolve during the time that you were building your firm to not throw in the towel when you met adversity?
Well, resilience is everything. And what I did was, when I was fired, I bought a $2,000 suit. Now, this is, 1985, a $2,000 suit. And I flew first class, and I had a car take me to appointments instead of a cab. And my wife said, we really can't afford that. And I said, no, but one sale will pay for everything. And I cannot show up in a buyer's office rumpled and sweaty or late. And so we have to make this investment. And so I did that. And what happened was, Henry, I treated myself well. I had respect for myself. I didn't see myself as a supplicant begging for the buyer's dollars. And so I had this peer level discussion with buyers, and it was candid and it was contrarian, and some of them were turned off by it. But what you see is what you get. And the people who like that kind of honesty and who saw innovation and originality, they not only bought, they bought repeatedly, and they referred me to others. And so that's what happened. And my wife and I saw the first rocky road through. The first year I made $67,000. The next year I made $125,000. The next year I made about $250,000. And then after that I was off to the races.
One of the things that sticks with me from that is reading a story of B.C. Forbes when he was starting out, had nothing, put on a business suit, and went and sat in the hotel lobbies where the who's who were meeting. And just getting to know people and looking the part started developing those connections. So a lot of what you're talking about there, looking the part, feeling the part, has as much to do internally as it does externally.
It does, and I believe that you have to show respect for your buyer. You have to show respect for the other person, and you do that by respecting yourself. And so, I overdress a little bit. If it's a casual atmosphere, I'll wear a sports jacket the first time to show respect. If people are all wearing suits, I'll wear a very good suit. But I like to show people respect, and I think you have to respect yourself first. So I don't march into an office and sit down. I wait to see where they want me to sit, across from the desk, on comfortable furniture. I never accept coffee because I'm going to spill it, it's hard to take notes. And so you have to understand what I call the decorum, of how you're going to go about work. And I see people in the services professions. I see accountants and lawyers and consultants and coaches and designers and so forth who can't use silverware. They'll sit down at a lunch and they'll hold a knife like it's a steak to drive through a vampire's heart. Or they'll use their fingers to push food on a fork. And, if I was sitting with them and I saw that, I wouldn't hire them. I don't care what their credentials. So I think you have to act in a professional manner. I don't think it's very difficult, but I think you have to learn what professionalism is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have a lot of viewers that are in that point in their career where they're making a launch out into their own field. They're stepping into the arena of life and saying, I'm not going to be fired by somebody ever again. I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to step off into the battlefield and figure out how to win this thing. What are the keys that they need to know to move forward?
Well, there's some internal and some external. I've been asked this question several times, and the internal things are, you have to know what value you're bringing, and you have to know who is your ideal buyer. You don't want to waste time appealing to people who are not your ideal buyers, because we only have, all of us, limited time and money. And that's why I said earlier, the internet is not your major marketing tool by any stretch of the imagination. So, what is your value as it is expressed as an outcome for your buyer, and who's your ideal buyer? Then the third question there is, how do I reach them, and how do they reach me? Okay, so 3 key marketing questions. The internal stuff is that you have to be careful to whom you listen. And you're going to save a lot of time getting a really good coach, but I'm going to explain what a coach is. A coach, if you're trying to ski, you don't sit in the chalet with somebody drinking brandy who tells you what to do when you're on the mountain in the morning. All right?
Right.
Nobody I know has ever learned to ski by reading a book, right? And I write books. But that's not how you learn to ride a bike or ski. You go up to the top of the hill with a coach who does exactly what you need to do. He shows you how to traverse the hill. She shows you how to bend your knees, whatever it happens to be. And you watch the coach from 6 or 10 yards back, and you emulate the best habits of the coach. You don't have to become as proficient as your coach, but you do have to emulate the best habits. If you're willing to do that, and you're willing to learn that way, and you eschew this quick, absolutely invalid stuff, make $25,000 a day, and all this kind of stuff. That's what people advertise on social media. So find people who do it well, and see if you can get them to coach you. You can invest in their coaching, or hang out with them. Marshall Goldsmith's a buddy of mine. We wrote a book together, and he says that Marshall, is the best executive coach in the world, and I think he is. And he says that I am the best entrepreneurial coach in the world. And we both agreed when we were writing this book that you can't help people who don't want to be helped. And so you have to show the vulnerability that you want to be helped, and that you're willing to take the advice and try it. And so that's the internal stuff you need along with the external stuff.
That's really powerful in thinking through it. A lot of folks, I know in my first business venture, I thought I'm going to do it on my own, and that business flopped. And it took a long time for me to realize that it's not me out here fighting against the world by myself. And much more so than how, it's who. Who can I surround myself with?
You're absolutely right. And Marshall told me he became a thought leader because he hung out with Peter Drucker. And he used to carry Drucker's bag, literally carry Drucker's briefcase for him. And so he would meet the president of Ford, he would meet the president of this, and so forth. And that's what Marshall did. And, I was in these consulting firms, and I watched what people did who knew marketing. I didn't know what marketing or sales was, and that wasn't part of my academic life. And I'll tell you, I'll answer a question you didn't ask me here, and it's this. What holds most people back is low self-esteem. They don't feel they control things. They feel that the universe is imploding on them. You need a high sense of self-worth. So just because you don't make a sale, just because you make an error, doesn't mean you're not a worthy person. It means you made an error. It means you made a mistake.
Right.
But you have to have high self-worth so you can deal with people on a pure level. And I find that today, more than ever, after COVID and with world problems and with turbulence and disruption, that people feel more powerless than ever, and they have to change that.
Absolutely. I think people see their mistake and they feel the weight of their mistake, misstep, whatever it may be, however minor, but then I'll go back to social media, what you were just talking about. On social media, you see a one-sided view of a story. No one's on there sharing all their mistakes and their errors. They're showing the best parts of life. You're getting a very segmented lifestyle, and people, I think, especially in my generation and generations younger, see the millionaire and billionaire lifestyle influenced by social media and forget that you have to go through the 100-air and 1,000-air steps before you get there.
Yeah, Marshall told me once that they love to play up the fact that, this person was discovered and became a movie star, because when you're in LA in particular, your waiter is a screenwriter and the manager of the restaurant is an actor, and so they claim. But they don't talk about, the 99,999 people who haven't made it.
Right.
And so they just pick out these exceptional people who made them. Everybody wants that, straight line, that shortcut. It doesn't work that way. And one of the things that holds people back is they tend to generalize negatives and isolate positives. And so if you don't make a sale, you say, I'm a lousy marketer. Instead of saying, I didn't make a sale today in this place to this person, and that's it, and you contain it. If they do make a sale,
Right.
they're tempted to say, well, I got lucky. Instead of saying, I've become an excellent marketer. So you have to generalize the positives and isolate the negatives.
Ooh, that's powerful. Generalize the positives and isolate the negatives. And that's going down
Yeah.
in the memory bank. So back to your story a little bit. What was the transition from your consulting business to business to becoming a consumer-based consultant helping other people?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I call it going from wholesale to retail. And what happened was, Million Dollar Consulting came out in '92. Today it's in its sixth edition, still on the shelves. But it came out in '92, and for the next 4 years, people called me and asked for free advice, and I gave it to them. It was my ego, and I said, "Oh God, they're coming to me for advice. This is great." And then I realized that I was spending more time giving free advice than I was spending getting paying customers. And so I said, I am going to charge to mentor people. And my wife said, I don't think anybody will pay you to mentor them. I said, yes, but if there's a fee, they'll stop calling me. So she says, well, what are you going to charge them? I said, $3,500. And she said, well, what's the investigation? What's the analysis behind that? I said, it's easy. It's the monthly lease on the Ferrari. And so if I get 12 people, I pay for the Ferrari for a year. I had 3 Ferraris, and I got a lot more than 12 people. And so I began to migrate over to this one-on-one kind of work because there were no politics in the office. I didn't have to sit in long, boring meetings. I didn't have to get on planes all the time. I didn't have to deal with the bureaucracy. I didn't have to deal with delayed payments and so forth. And so I said to myself, can I make as much money dealing on the retail side? And it soon became apparent I could, and even more. And so by the early 2000s, by 2001, 2002, I had migrated out of corporate work, except for a couple of clients who wanted me to hang around, and I did a little bit of work. But basically, I was all the way over on the retail side. And then I thought of more and more different offerings. And so not just coaching. I'd hold conventions. I'd hold conferences. I did workshops. Then along comes Zoom, right? Or at the time, Skype, but Zoom. And it was Zoom workshops, my God. That's just... How can you beat that? There's no airports, It's so, and people pay for value. So It doesn't matter that you're not physically present with them. And in a lot of respects, they prefer not to get on airplanes, and they prefer not to have their luggage searched and so forth. So that's what's happened. And, I have this thing called an accelerant curve, which shows that you bring people in with free offerings or low-priced offerings. Then there's moderate things, but they keep talking to each other. My next book that comes out in a few months is on building dynamic communities. And so when you build a community of people who interact live physically, but also remotely, also by newsletter and books and so forth, if you give them the opportunity to communicate, you have evangelism. And evangelism is very powerful marketing.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing there is you weren't the ski instructor sitting in the chalet sipping brandy. You had been going down the slopes. You knew how to provide value to these individuals trying to start their businesses. I think there's a lot of folks in today's world that decide I'm going to hang a shingle out and start coaching people, but they don't have any real world experience yet. And I think that's a key thing that you hit on.
Yeah, and I learned something else, and that is, there's an old story that nobody buys a drill, they want a hole. And the only reason you buy a drill is to get a hole. A drill does you no good if you don't want a hole. And I started to think about this, and I really changed my focus to lifestyle, because it seemed to me, you don't just want a client. You don't just want a check. You want to be able to live a certain lifestyle. So $1 million consulting was a metaphor. I mean, some people might want 2 or 3 million. Some people might say 700,000, I'm happy. Whatever it is. But what I tried to show then is a lifestyle that you can have for yourself, for your family, assure yourself your future's taken care of. And for me, that was a transition as well. Not focusing, because too many people use money as their metric, and they're vastly unhappy.
Right.
And so the real point here is to have a lifestyle that gives you comfort and happiness.
And free time, comfort, happiness, and the control over
Wealth
your
is
time.
discretionary time. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
That's your key phrase I remember in a lot of your books is wealth is
That's right.
discretionary time.
Yep. You go where you want, when you want.
Well, I've really appreciated having you on the podcast today and sharing your advice and insights with the listeners and viewers. As we're parting here, what would be your last piece of advice that you would give everybody?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. You asked terrific questions. I really enjoyed this. Time has just shot by. My advice is that be aware of your own power. Be aware of your own worth. Be aware of your own value contributions. And keep reinforcing the fact that what you're doing is helping people. I mean, you can get up in the morning and say, geez, I have bills to pay. I have to talk to this person I don't like. There's going to be a person this. And it's a long, slow crawl through enemy territory. Or you can get up in the morning and say, what a great day. I can't wait to provide value, which is an enlightened, positive day ahead of you. So I would suggest that you have to understand that you control this. You control your attitude. And so be a person of wealth who's helping others, and you'll find that this will rebound to help you.
Wow. Well, you tied on a little bit of a Zig Ziglar momentum there, where I love his quote that says, you can have whatever you want in life as long as you help enough other people get what they want.
I knew Zig, and we were both in the Speakers Hall of Fame, and he said a lot of good, very cool things. He was a remarkable combination showman and salesperson. And let me just add that there's all kinds of free material on my website, alanweiss.com. And it's audio, video, text, and people are welcome to it.
Absolutely. That was actually the next question coming up is where can folks find you and what sort of things you have going on nowadays that people might want to get involved in?
Yeah, alanweiss.com. You'll find just scads of stuff there. And like I said, just take advantage of the free stuff. But if you like, there are also lists of my live workshops, of my remote workshops, of my newsletters you can subscribe to, and so forth and so on.
Absolutely. I look forward to the Monday morning memo every morning, every Monday. Look forward to that one. Well, as we're closing out here, the one thing I did want to mention before we close out is I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about your new book that's been released, Sentient Strategy, because that's something that we haven't gotten to yet. But I know you have a live conference coming up about that book and wanted to get that out there.
Well, I certify people in Sentient Strategy as a consultant. And I wrote the book about 2 years ago. It came out about a year ago. And I realized before the pandemic that looking 10 years ahead and spending 2 months to set strategy is like driving a buggy with horses on the interstate. It just doesn't work anymore. And then the pandemic hit. And so nobody expected the pandemic, and hell, nobody predicted the internet for that matter. And so I said, I'm going to do this contrarian. I'm going to do this radically different. And the fact is that disruption and volatility should be offensive weapons. You should look a year out, 1 year out. You should set strategy in 1 to 2 days, and this is how it's going to be done. So far, I've certified close to 70 people in 6 countries, and they're teaching Sentient Strategy. The book's done very, very well. And it's just a radically new look at how companies should be looking at their future, because we have to face it. Things change too quickly to be locked into very long-term plans.
Absolutely. And that's a great resource for folks that are viewing this that are in the consulting field and are growing their own business and want a certification to put behind it. Nothing more powerful than a certification with the name Alan Weiss from the consulting world. Alan, thanks so much for joining me today. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I appreciate all of your time.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate the invitation, and I wish you and all of your viewers and listeners all the best. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.